the directions to the store. The goal is there and the goal is needed. The path of unfolding to get there is obviously a variable that has to be taken into account. It's relevant, but it doesn't change the end goal. So if you run into people that say, well, you guys don't know how you're going to get to what you're doing, so therefore I'm not interested, well, first of all, they obviously don't even understand the necessity of the system to begin with. The transition is a secondary problem, and it doesn't change the goal whatsoever. It would be different if the goal was utterly irrational or far too fantastic to be technologically or socially feasible, but that is not the case whatsoever. There's no attribute of this economic model that is problematic that I can find, and the real issue comes down to testing the full system naturally through the scientific method. But it's important to point out that all the components we are talking about are not that radical. And there's no logic to show that once put together, somehow all the component parts wouldn't work. Bridging all of the attributes and components that comprise a resource-based economy is going to be a challenge, but it's no more challenging than building a bridge between two islands. It's no more challenging than doing any type of infrastructure project that's done every year throughout the world. It's simply another technical problem that needs resolution, and none of the attributes of that resolution are outside of the realm of modern scientific knowledge today. And point 3, which might seem like a mild paradox compared to point 2, and this will lead into point 4, is that we are always going to be in some type of transition. So just keep that in mind as a general technical understanding, or even philosophical understanding, is that there's always a state of transition. I think a resource-based economy will achieve its definition once we get rid of money and rely exclusively on resource management. But there can still be tremendous amounts of social change occurring within the system, and there will be. But just keep that in mind. So I hear this rhetoric a lot. They say that, once they achieve this, once we achieve that, you're always going to be in a state of transition. And that leads me to point 4, regarding the specifics of police and security, because this comes up a lot. People say, oh, and law. People say, oh, well, you guys are talking about a world without police, security, and law. I can't fathom that whatsoever. And it's usually a good idea not to bring that up immediately to people. The best way to describe it is to say, listen, we want to create an environment which slowly reduces the necessity for police, security, and law, over time hyperbolating or ideally manifesting the need for having zero police, security, and law. And then you can outline the reasons why that is, about solving social problems, about eliminating the income gap, and all of the causal attributes that are generating all of the destruction and distortion that you continually see and is growing. So just want to point that out. I hear that a lot. And point 5, very quickly, and I've stated this before, it's just important to point out that no single country can create a resource-based economy on its own, because a resource-based economy is based upon planetary management. Now, coming back to transition, you could say that, well, maybe a meteorite might fly into our solar system and be accessible to us for mining for precious minerals, and that could very easily happen. So obviously you're extending the resources of the planet to the external, but you get the internal logic. There's many different reasons why a country can't just claim to be a resource-based economy. If it was isolated, it only has access to the resources it has there. The United States and the history of colonialism is what it is. They would never leave an isolated area alone if everyone there was able to actually support themselves with the internal resources that they had. It wouldn't work within a global monetary system to have pockets of communes, if you will, regardless of how large they would be. It simply would create conflict originating from the external, I can assure you. This is why we need a global system. It's not that it's just ideal to have a global system. There's no other option but to have a global system, because there's really no escape, I was reading the other day, and I had a little fantasy, because a lot of people in the movement, they think to themselves, if we could only just get away from the dominant forces, and I share that the dominant forces of the monetary system and these values. And I actually do share that to a certain degree, even though I like resolution. But I was thinking to myself, what if we lived just a couple hundred years more in the future, and we understood space-time a little bit better, and the hypothetical, Wheeler topological feature, the wormhole in theoretical physics, was actually understood, and it was actually calculable, and we could just pile on to a spaceship, get into a wormhole, get the hell away from the solar system and this galaxy, and just send ourselves to some other place on the other side of the universe where nobody from the monetary world could find us, and then terraform a planet and live happily ever after. Obviously, that's a complete joke, so please no one post that as though I'm proposing that as a solution. Thank you. But it is fun to think about, because I feel the escapist attribute as well, and believe me, if there was an option to escape, I would certainly consider it, but there is none. We have to stand and face the environment around us. We are on this planet, and we have to take control of it in an intelligent way before these mechanisms of ancient folkways, of detrimental perspectives, destroy it around us. Okay, so let's begin. Ideal transition. First thing that has to happen, you have to resolve the current artificial crises facing humanity. Universal debt forgiveness of all private and public debt. The slate is wiped completely clean. You simply get rid of all the debt in one fair swoop, and frankly, that's what's being done, or it's what's going to be done in the future, because there is no other option. But that's what's done. Next, unemployment. The only way you can overcome the growing technological unemployment and an economically generated unemployment, which of course would be helped when you eliminate the debt pressures, but nevertheless technological unemployment is real. What you do is you have to reduce the workday for those that are currently employed to allow for others to come in, adjusting the pay scales accordingly to meet a minimum standard of living. So someone working 40 hours a week would share that with, for example, someone working 20 hours a week, each working 20 hours a week with their pay scale adjusted to meet their standards of living. Notice I didn't say meet minimum wage, which statistically does not take into account what people need to survive or any specific human condition within the system. You have to have a thorough evaluation of each individual's circumstances, problems they might have, to consider such a thing as minimum wage. Minimum wage has no statistical basis, and its relationship to average human survival is nil. So wages are adjusted based on the specific disposition of the individual and the family. That's the only logical way to do it if you're going to use a system of such. Oh, and by the way, I'll talk about how to transition from the labor economy through technological application as we move forward. Please understand that anyone listening to this ideal transition I'm talking about, you're going to be able to poke a tremendous number of holes into it. If I was to write this out, it would take so many attributes to define all of the caveats and specifics, and it's not fit for a radio show. And by the way, this is a fantasy. I'm showing a specific logic. Some of it might be implementable through time. Some of it will not. The system is going to do whatever the system is going to do, and most likely rationality isn't going to have a play for the most part. So, that being said, wages are adjusted to make sure people can afford the basic necessities of life at a bare minimum. Again, minimum wage is socialism, people. So for those of you out there that are so anti-socialistic in this laissez-faire kind of world, it's time to grow up. Now, moving on to the banking system. Fractional reserve lending policy is eradicated and monetary growth system stops. This means the boom and bust cycle is virtually removed, and what you do in transition is create a one-to-one correlation where money is paired with consumer demand and services. In other words, money is regulated to match the total value of goods and services in the system statistically. Money is still generated in paper form, it's still fiat, but it is calculated in a statistical assessment of market turnover. So the total existence of money and the money supply is equal essentially to the fixed rates of goods and services in the system, again quantified by the average rates of turnover. Now, this system, again, would need many, many qualifiers, but it's important to understand that the mean value of the total money supply would be set for any nation with a certain flexibility, which for minor expansion and contraction around the central mean, which does not carry over into long-term growth ever. So periodic adjustments can be made when monetary disimbalances between sectors and class demographics occur, which would persist because even with such strict monetary regulation, it does not change the basic corrupt psychology and self-interest and gaming strategies to acquire that money, which of course is one of the big points of a resource-based economy, to overcome those attributes. I want to make a quick point of this kind of, again, laissez-faire distinction of economics where you just remove any type of policy. Really what this is, it's like taking a group of hyenas and starving them for a couple of weeks, loading them up with crank and throwing them into a big pit with a dead cow in the center of it. And the dead cow has been noted to feed all of them equally. But yet, what are they going to do? They are going to create gaming strategies. They are going to fight to obtain this scarcity as brutally as possible. They will create little groups. They'll work in pairs. They will work to do whatever they can in their small pockets to secure their positions of advantage to gain that food. And this is exactly what the entire corporate and global market structure is. Groups of mafias working to get their piece of the pie regardless of how they do it. And there's no such thing as the invisible hand and a fair balance for anyone. And I'm sorry to say, the world you see around you is the result. So any of the economic theorists out there that continue to harp on some fantasy invisible hand and that big government is the problem, no, it's not. Big government, I hate to say it, is what will, in fact, save the entire market system in its corrupt fashion of organization. It is the regulation of this system which is required and has always been required, always. And anyone that doesn't see that does no idea what they're talking about, and the propaganda that big government has been the problem is just that, propaganda with zero statistical analysis or basis of what the real problems of the market system are. But I won't go on that tangent. And once again, I want to continue these qualifiers and caveats to what the focus of a resource-based economy is. This isn't some big government resource-based economy association. We want to eliminate the protocols of government as we know it today as well by resolving the actual problems and orienting society scientifically. So please don't misunderstand. Now, back on point. So, the unresolvable problem within the market system of monetary acquisition and hoarding, of course, still exists. Profit generation and wealth generation, savings. So in order to keep that balance, you have to have income limits set, both high and low. It's a natural attribute in a fixed economy. So income limits would be set, buffered by a certain finite expansion and contraction of the money supply. It's far from perfect, but it will keep inequality in balance while avoiding shortages of the money supply, which can derail shortages of production and things of such. Again, such a ratio can be statistically generated based on population, value, demand, and other parameters. And again, we're not advocating this type of structure. It is simply a transitional concept to try and get balance within the system as we move forward in transition. So likewise, while you have monetary regulation in this finite one-to-one ratio, statistically oriented and adjusted dynamically based on what's happening in the actual economy to continue a balance of distribution of the money, you'd have to have this ratio also exist on the global scale, since we currently have floating markets and these comparisons of currency. You get rid of the floating markets, first of all, and you make a solid, statistically generated ratio of what the value of an economy is, its monetary correlation, the production of the money, how it's orchestrated, and you make a ratio to all other nations, so you end up with a statistical model that can be dynamically updated as well to keep the balance. I hope that makes sense to you. I don't want to go into a big detailed explanation of that, but if you really think about what I'm describing, it's very, very simple. And this leads me to Wall Street as a natural culmination of this evolution. You get rid of Wall Street. Wall Street system of trade investment is largely an illusion. It's a game manufactured that pulls all sorts of wealth into the hands of a select few. It's not there for the public. Public ownership, if you will, is a given in society as evolution and transition occurs. So the function of a corporation is naturally public. What else is a corporation supposed to be? The notion of shares of a company becomes obsolete. So